So you're forming Diamond Head in the late 70s. And your peers at that time, you know, Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, and we're going to get to Saxon later. You know, these bands are starting to, you know, up and coming along with Diamond Head. You had some early gigs supporting Iron Maiden, AC/DC, but I understand that you had some difficulties with management. And maybe that was part of the reason that you weren't along for the ride, along with Def Leppard, Iron Maiden, etc.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So Diamond Head formed in 1976, as probably did a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal bands. Partly, punk was very encouraging because that sort of appeared late 76, early 77. And it was a bit DIY. And, you know, you could do it yourself, make your own records, to send demos in, you know. So I think a lot of the bands just thought, right, we can do this, you know, we'll make our own demos and things like that. So I would imagine Maiden were doing the same in London, Def Leppard were doing the same in Sheffield, all inspired by the big bands, the classic bands of the 70s, because we were almost spoiled for choice. You know, I realize now in hindsight, 70s are my favorite decade for music. And, you know, to list off the incredible rock bands that were around in the 70s, it was so inspiring, you know. And each, you know, every couple of months, somebody'd bring out a brilliant album. Like, say, I can definitely remember things like Sad Rings of Destiny blowing me away, you know, or Rainbow, or, you know, UFO and Thin Lizzy. So, you know, it was so inspiring, all these awesome bands. And they all sounded different from one another. There wasn't just, they all sound this way or that way. They're totally original bands. It just inspired bands like myself and you know, your Leopards and Maidens to probably form a band, try and get a record deal, try and do what our peers had done, and do the same thing. Now, as you know, Iron Maiden signed to EMI, which is probably the best rock label in the UK for breaking rock bands. And Def Leppard was signed to Phonogram, which was probably the second best label. So once EMI had their New Wobberham band, which is Iron Maiden, and Phonogram had Def Leppard, then they sort of didn't want other bands after that. So we struggled to get a deal. I think we've got a few offers from maybe RCA and Arista and some of the other labels, but we had sort of amateur management, you know, just local guys who was trying to help, trying to do the right thing, but they didn't have the experience, you know. Leopard had amateur managers as well at first, but they managed to get a leg up with Peter Mensch once, you know, they signed to Lieber Krebs. And Iron Maiden were lucky to have Rod Smallwood, who turned out to be a brilliant manager. But we had a guy who owned a cardboard box factory in a place called Lye in the Midlands. And so even though he was enthusiastic and he had a little bit of money to put into the band, like we could buy a van and we bought a little PA and things like that, he didn't have the contacts and he didn't have the experience. So he sort of learned on the job. And it probably, you know, ultimately didn't impress the label. So when we did eventually get a record deal in 1982, the record label didn't like our management. They thought they were out of their depth, to use their word. And so, you know, it got to a point where it was either change management or we'll drop you. And we didn't change management. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a life lesson.
Sure. Well, you did manage to eventually get Lightning to the Nations out.
Yeah.
And
Thank God.
yeah, right. And my understanding is that you initially pressed only 1,000 copies of it,
Correct.
and it was only available in a plain white sleeve because you were basically kind of shopping it around as a demo. My question is, of those 1,000 copies in the plain white sleeve, have you ever heard of any of those copies selling for an absurd amount of money after all these years?
Absolutely. It is a bit of a new wave of British heavy metal collector's item.
Sure.
Because there were only 1,000, and because of Metallica covering 4 songs off that album, it's become a bit of a thing. You know, I've got the white label album. You know,
Right.
so yeah, we did 1,000 copies, white sleeve, white label, nothing on it at all. Didn't say Diamond Head, nothing on the cover, and it was, we sort of looked at it at the time as a sort of demo album. We kind of figured that we'd go to the label and play it to them, and they'd think, oh, this is great, you know, and if they can get it together enough to make an album, you know, then they must be good and all that. And I don't know if we actually thought they would just release it, or if they thought, well, we'll re-record it and we'll use a bigger studio and spend more time and money on it. We were probably a bit naive that, you know, we didn't quite know what was to do for the best, but at least we had 1,000 copies that we could sell at gigs and mail order, as you said. So we did that, and that would probably help keep the band going with crew, with, you know, petrol, and get us up and down the country. Because by this point, we'd had a bit of exposure on the Friday Rock show. We'd had a couple of singles. Jeff Barton had done a big piece on us when we opened for Iron Maiden at the Lyceum. We'd opened for AC/DC as well, as you mentioned, at the Newcastle and Southampton. So those were monumentally big gigs for us.
Sure.
We'd only done maybe 30 gigs or something when we got those dates with AC/DC. And we worked out that the management, which was Peter Mensch, was looking at Diamond Head with a view to manage the band. And we only worked that out afterwards, but he came into our dressing room, and we had a little chat, which was nice. And I thought that was perfectly natural. You know, oh, AC/DC's managers come to say hello. But of course, he was checking us out. You know, he was sounding us out, seeing what we like, see if we had the right kind of stuff. You know, the ambition to conquer the world.
The X factor.
Yeah. Ultimately, he didn't. He signed Def Leppard, but it was another lesson, you know, to learn. And we were very flattered that he offered us those 2 dates, and that we got to do them, because we were huge AC/DC fans. So that's always been an amazing experience that we supported AC/DC.
What year was that?
1980. So it was Bon Scott's last 2 ever gigs.
Whoa! Wow!
Yeah, he died.
Legendary.
A few weeks later.
Yeah.
Which was a complete freak out to us, because of course not only were we huge fans, but we just got to know him a little bit, and we'd met him and got his autograph. And then, what a shocker!
Yeah.
Wow.
It was January 1980.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
There's another interesting factoid about Diamond Head.
That's just crazy.